She existed, she was recorded, and then she vanished. A piece of evidence in the McCann case simply disappeared from the files, burned, destroyed, erased from the process. Today, we will reveal what it contained, why it was erased, and what that reveals about what they never wanted you to know. Picture a sheet of paper catching fire. It's not a metaphor, it's what actually happened. A piece of paper with handwritten words that wasn't supposed to disappear, but it did. The flames crept up its edges. The smell of burning paper filled the room for seconds, then only ashes and silence. That sheet wasn't just anything. It was part of the Madeleine McCann case files, a real document, an item in the process, and the scariest part, it was seen, recorded, catalogued, and yet it vanished. You've probably never heard of this evidence, not in the documentaries, not in the news, not in the official files, because it was eliminated before it could say anything. Burned, literally and symbolically. There was no technical error. It wasn't misplaced. It was a decision. And when a piece of evidence that could change everything is destroyed, we have to ask, what exactly did it threaten? Most people think justice is served when evidence is analyzed, when files are opened, when nothing is hidden. But here, justice was afraid. Afraid of what that sheet said, afraid of who it would hit. And so someone decided it was better to burn it than to face what would come next. But the truth, it doesn't die quietly. It screams through the absences. There's a kind of pain that doesn't make headlines, that doesn't become a Netflix series, that doesn't have a soundtrack. It's the pain of those who know something important was erased and no one goes after it. The pain of realizing that justice, too, is afraid, that it chooses who to protect and what to forget. This pain has no name, but it lives deep, in the stomach of those who followed this case for years, in the throat of those who tried to speak out, in the chest of those who were told it was just a conspiracy theory. But it's not. It's not a theory when the evidence existed, when it was seen, when it had a number, a signature, a location, and then it turned to smoke. This pain doesn't need drama, it just needs one question. Why didn't anyone go after the sheet they burned? Today, you're going to see what no one told you. Not about what was written, but about what someone made sure to erase. And maybe after this video the question will change. No longer, who did this? But why did we let it burn without reacting? If this touched you, stay with me. There's still too much catching fire and no one wants to look. When the documents arrived in the UK, they were sealed. Each folder carried the weight of what could finally explain everything. The names, the times, the doubts. Madeleine McCann's disappearance was no longer a beach mystery. It was a state matter, and the evidence, now outside Portugal, should have spoken for itself. But not all of it came back. Among the hundreds of pages, there was one that vanished without a trace. It was listed. It was officially recorded, and then erased. Physical evidence. A detail that, according to parallel investigations, involved an item taken from the family's apartment and analyzed abroad. The kind of document that doesn't get lost by accident, but disappears when someone decides it shouldn't exist anymore. The first reaction was silence. No press release, no formal complaint. Just the void, where a piece of paper once was, and a growing unease among the few who knew of that item's existence. If it was irrelevant, why was it destroyed? On the other side, Gonçalo Amaral, the investigator who dared to tell what he saw, began to raise questions. In his book, he suggested that parts of the so-called red file mysteriously disappeared after being sent to Britain. Entire reports that didn't return, photographs that vanished, and one specific piece of evidence, according to him, that disappeared. From the official record, Amaral was silenced, sued, accused, but never disproven with evidence. The question that lingers since then is less about the content of the sheet and more about its absence. If even physical documents can vanish from an international case, what else can be erased before anyone sees? Maybe the problem isn't just what's missing, but the fact that no one, absolutely no one, wants to know why. Frank Olson died after falling from a 13th floor window in New York. He was a CIA scientist working on secret drug tests on civilians. After his death, documents were destroyed, reports gone. And the official version, a suicide, became the only one the public could hear for years. Decades later, it was discovered he had been poisoned, but the papers that proved it had already turned to ash. In the McCann case, the pattern is similar. There's no need to deny what's already been forgotten. Just make sure no one remembers it existed. Psychology calls this dissonance. The more you want to believe something is clean, the more you reject any stain. And in this case, the stain was burned before it could be shown, because maybe no one wanted to deal with what it might reveal. Maybe the evidence didn't just say what happened. Maybe it said who knew and that was too much to let live. Some say the British police simply chose not to file certain elements. But how do you file something that no longer exists? The disappearance of this evidence created more than a gap in the investigation. It created a symbolic shield around untouchable names, people who were too close, who had too much access, who could fall on if that sheet had stayed in the process, and that's where the pattern comes in. Cases like Monica Lewinsky's involving public figures and institutional power always have something in common. When the truth threatens to harm those at the top, it isn't answered. It's eliminated. The document burns. The testimony vanishes. Silence becomes policy. The truth in this case wasn't suppressed, it was incinerated. Maybe the scariest part isn't what disappeared, but the fact that no one went after it. Because the question now isn't about what was missing. It's about who was too afraid to let that evidence exist. They knew what they were doing. The evidence existed. It wasn't speculation. It was mentioned in at least 2 internal documents, a technical report and an analysis request. They described a piece of clothing collected from the apartment where Madeleine disappeared. According to sources close to the original investigation, it had a mark, just one, small, but enough to warrant forensic collection. That material was sent for analysis, and after that, it vanished. No return, no justification, just the trace of the evidence in the records, like a ghost that touched the process and then evaporated. But the worst part wasn't the absence of the evidence itself, it was the context. Because according to the document prior to the analysis, that piece of clothing could establish a direct link to someone in the family's inner circle. And that's where the truth stops being legal and becomes political. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was one of containment. An investigator who worked on the case in Portugal reported years later, anonymously, that there was guidance not to pursue that line of inquiry further, and no one said why. You don't understand. That name can't leak. That's what he heard when he pressed with a simple question. What about the results of that evidence? It was just a piece of clothing, but there was something in it that put everything at risk. The system, the public image, the silent pact that began forming behind the scenes of the McCann case from the first week. No one can be directly held accountable, even when the evidence starts pointing. At that point, fear spoke louder than justice. And when fear holds power, it doesn't silence, it burns. Have you ever smelled burning paper? It's not just smoke, there's a weight in the air. A mix of old ink, accumulated dust, and nameless guilt. When a document catches fire, what disappears isn't just the text. It's what it could cause. That's what happened here. The item, the reports, the traces, all burned. Officially, filed imprecisely. In practice, incinerated as if the truth were a greater risk than the lie. And that leaves us with a question that burns slowly. Who would be so afraid of what that evidence said that they preferred it never existed? The answer lies in the pattern, because this wasn't the only evidence that vanished. During the process, other items linked to DNA analysis were sent to the UK and never reappeared. Clothing, samples, photographs, everything that could directly connect someone to the scene, gone. This isn't coincidence, this is choice. And whoever chooses to erase the evidence also chooses what the world will remember. Foucault said that what is archived defines what is believed. Orwell was more direct. Who controls the past controls the present. In the McCann case, memory was edited, and the burned evidence became a symbol of that. It was a candle, a small flame in the darkness, but someone snuffed it out before it could shine too brightly. Still, the smell lingered. And sometimes that smell rises again, like now, here, in this moment when you hear this and feel that something doesn't add up. Because it doesn't. It's strange, isn't it? How certain truths only hurt when they fall into silence. I keep thinking, if someone was so afraid of that evidence, maybe it said more than any confession. And if they said it was worthless, why? Did they burn it like it was everything? The truth doesn't always disappear. It just waits for someone who isn't afraid to smell the smoke. You can see the ashes, even when the fire isn't just the paper. It's what that paper meant. A line of investigation that was never crossed. A name that could never be spoken. A truth that was never allowed to be born. That evidence didn't vanish. It was removed, burned with intent. And the intent is what weighs. For a long time, this was treated as a procedural error, a bureaucratic mistake. But the coldness behind the scenes told another story. The disappearance of that item wasn't the only one. There were patterns, clothing that didn't return, samples that were never sent back, parts of the so-called red file from the Portuguese police that vanished when they crossed the border, and no one investigated why. Worse, no one wanted to. When someone asked about that item, the response was always the same. It was filed. We don't know where it is. It wasn't relevant. But if it wasn't relevant, why did they make a point to erase it? What they tried to destroy wasn't just evidence. It was the trail, the loose thread that could unravel the whole story, the inconvenient trace that contradicted the official version, a piece of truth that couldn't be told because it put powerful people against the wall. And that's where justice loses its voice. When the truth needs permission to be heard, that's the open wound, and it hasn't healed. Today, what's left is this echo, a hole in the files, a blank space in the documents. But the silence that remains isn't passive. It screams, in its own way. It accuses without words. It forces us to remember even when everything around us wants us to forget. That's what makes this evidence even more alive. It became a symbol, not just of what was erased, but of what can still be recovered. Because memory doesn't need paper to exist. It just needs someone who refuses to forget. And maybe that's why this video exists. Because the question is no longer whether it was destroyed. The question is, who still has the courage to remember? There was a moment, in the middle of writing this script, when I stopped. I felt an emptiness in my stomach. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was something drier, like I'd stumbled over an unmarked gravestone. A piece of truth buried in haste, covered quickly, as if to erase the pain without looking at its face. And then I thought, what if no one else talks about this? What if this silence wins? What's left? The shadow remains. The shadow, Jung said, is born from what we deny. The shadow that grows every time we choose the comfort of ignorance. And it doesn't stop. It takes up space, darkening the corners, erasing what could have been justice. Nietzsche spoke of this too, that what is denied returns as fate, as repeated tragedy, as an error we think is new but have already committed. We just don't remember, because we chose to forget. But here we haven't forgotten, and if you're here, it's because you haven't either. So maybe, in the end, that evidence wasn't completely burned, because as long as someone remembers, it still exists. Even if only in the ashes, even if only in the unease, even if only in a video like this. The fire erased the page, but it didn't erase what it meant. And sometimes, all the truth needs to avoid dying is someone who isn't afraid to light it again, because some memories time can't erase. They just wait for someone who still cares. You know what bothers me most about all this? It's not the evidence itself, not the paper, nor the substance that was erased. It's what this says about us, about how we've learned to accept that certain things just disappear, and no one asks anything. We hear it was filed, and we bow our heads. We hear it wasn't relevant, and we swallow hard. We see the silence, and pretend it's normal. The truth, when burned, doesn't turn to smoke. It turns into something else. It turns into distrust. It turns into a wound no one sees but keeps reopening inside. This story isn't just about a missing piece of evidence. It's about everything we didn't see, because they made us look the other way. The evidence is gone, but its absence is more present than any document, because what isn't said sometimes speaks louder than what's written. And I'll be honest with you, this wasn't easy to finish. There were moments I had to stop, get up, step away from the screen, because some things hurt more when you truly understand them. And this pain isn't new. It feels like that sensation of knowing something important was left behind, that there was a chance there, a path that was never followed, and maybe it is never will be. But even so, I'm here, telling this story, not because I expect justice, but because I refuse to forget. And if you feel this too, then maybe we're on the same side. Because in the end, what burns isn't the paper. It's what it represented. The memory that wasn't allowed. The page that could have changed everything and was never read. And now, we're the ones left to remember. If this moved you, if you felt a lump in your throat at any point in this video, then maybe you already know. I am the memory of the evidence they burned. And you can be too. If you want to show you're here, that this story matters to you, that these questions still burn inside, the super chat isn't just a button, it's a flame, a symbolic gesture that says, I remember. I don't accept. I'm here. It's not about financial support, it's about not staying silent, about showing even quietly that these stories still deserve to be told, and those who send a super chat here aren't just spectators, they're part of this story. Now, let me ask you something. If you were standing in front of a document that could change everything, but knew it would be burned the next day, would you have the courage to keep it, or would you burn it with your own? Hands some questions we carry for years, until one day a story like this forces us to face them head on, and then there's no turning back. Maybe that's why you stayed until now. Maybe, deep down, you're also tired of seeing the truth swallowed by empty files and locked drawers. And if that's the case, there's one more thing you need to see. In the next video, I'll tell you about a silent witness. Not a cop, not a journalist, not family, but someone who saw something no one else did. And since then, has been haunted by a detail so small, no one noticed. But it might have been the biggest mistake of all. If you want to feel what happens when a forbidden memory starts to eat away at the one who tried to bury it, then that's the video you need to see. Not out of curiosity, but because the pain it carries, it might be the same one you felt here. And before you go, answer me this. After hearing all this, what stayed with you? What was the part that hit you? The hardest? Write it. In your own way. It doesn't need to be pretty or right. It just needs to be true. It can be just one line, but let it come from within. I'll read every single one. And if you stayed with me until here, comment. I am the memory of the evidence they burned. That way, I'll know you understood. That you felt it. That you didn't forget. Because some stories only survive and when someone refuses to let them be erased, and sometimes all the truth needs is one look that still cares. We'll meet again in the next story, in the next wound, in the next flame. Not all silence is forgetting.